It was 05:30, 16th of December 1944, near the German frontier, and a junior panzer officer could see his breath fog his periscope. Orders were simple: break through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse, roll on Antwerp. He knew the stakes by the fuel gauge: half tanks, road nets icy, bridges not guaranteed. But the night sky was thick with cloud. No jabos, no Allied eyes. The barrage began like a door slamming shut on the forest. 45 minutes of rockets and guns. Then Volksgrenadiers slipping forward to knife the first lines. The officer's map had lines drawn in pencil. Losheim Gap first, then the twin villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath. North, Elsenborn Ridge. Center, Clairvaux and Bastogne. West, the Meuse. In the headphones, the net chattered code words and grid squares. Someone repeated the timetable. The attack had one gift, surprise, and one enemy, time. Before the weather cleared, the armored spearheads had to claw 80 kilometers, seize bridges, and force a strategic shock. This was the last throw, and everyone knew it, even if no one named it. Tanks coughed to life. Convoys began to move. The forest absorbed the sound. The gamble was on. He had heard the planner's logic. The Americans called this a quiet sector. Their lines were stretched thin. Some divisions were new. Logistics favored roads. Morale assumed winter lull. The Germans would hide their buildup, move at night, keep radio silence, and let fog and snow cancel Allied air. With luck, speed and shock would fracture the front, and the old doctrine, Schwerpunkt, would do the rest. It sounded like 1940 in miniature, but even then he noticed the oddities. Horse teams in the rear echelon, capture fuel penciled in briefings, orders to bypass fights and keep rolling, while parallel columns had to make the same timelines on one-lane forest roads. He looked at the ammunition stacked in the turret and thought of the map distance to Antwerp. It was far, longer than courage. Longer than the fuel here is the thesis in plain terms. The Germans believed a focused blow, delivered under cover of weather, could crack an overconfident enemy, force political doubt, and reset the Western Front. They bet on surprise, morale, and the edge of veteran armored units to sprint to the Meuse before the Allied system could react. What happened instead is the math of dominance. The Allied machine of artillery, logistics, and command control absorbed the shock and reweighted the fight. Once the skies cleared, air power and road net control constrained German movement and punished any daylight massing. On the ground, American artillery direction centers and flexible reserves transformed scattered regiments into a coherent fire grid. The German spirit of audacity won early days and some road junctions. The Allied system, fuel, shells, road discipline, radios, and an industrial replacement pipeline, won the campaign. The contrast is not caricature. German battle groups fought with skill and nerve. Some spearheads covered astonishing ground under punishing conditions. But every kilometer west deepened their supply problem and thickened American resistance. The battlefield gradually shifted from a race to a siege. Choke points, ridge lines, and crossroads where the clock started working against the attackers. The result, measured in days, gallons, and artillery salvos, shows why modern war rarely yields to dash alone. Why this time? Why this place? The Ardennes offered terrain that disguised assembly areas and narrowed the initial front. The line opposite was held by thin U.S. forces recovering from the Hurtgen forest and reconstituting divisions. It was winter. Cloud and freezing fog promised protection from Allied air for at least a few days. Antwerp, the port that fed Allied armies, sat as the political and logistical target. If the 6th SS Panzer Army in the north smashed through to Liège and beyond, if the 5th Panzer Army in the center gained the road net, if the 7th Army in the south guarded the flank, then the Meuse crossings could be seized before the Anglo-American command could move heavy reserves. That was the geometry of the gamble. Timing mattered. German oil production had been mauled by the Allied oil campaign since spring 1944, forcing rationing and training cuts and even horse-drawn supply for the assault zones. Stocks for the offensive were finite. Several plans assumed captured Allied fuel to keep Panthers moving. The window: launch under bad weather, move by night, pass the Aar and Amblève rivers, and reach the Meuse in roughly 72–96 hours. Every delay would ripple. A bridge held too long at Clairvaux, a ridge line that refused to fall at Elsenborn, or traffic jams behind roadblocks. Each would convert the operation from a sprint into a bleed. What did the German High Command assume about the opponent, and why did that seem logical? First, they judged Allied intelligence complacent. Ultra had trained headquarters to expect German defensive postures, and the Ardennes front looked quiet. German radio silence, night moves, and camouflage masked assembly areas. Many American staff officers weighted their preconceptions more than fragmentary reports of armor traffic. It was a plausible read. Second, German planners assessed that American divisions, especially green units, depended on road-based logistics and centralized artillery support. Hit through the woods, grab the crossroads, and the support web falters. Tie up the northern shoulder near Monschau and Elsenborn. Punch through the center with armor. Bypass towns where possible. Leave sieges to following infantry. Meanwhile, special operations, English-speaking commandos in U.S. uniforms, would sow road confusion and slow the Allied staff cycle. There was logic. In a road-poor, forested battle space, a few misdirected convoys and severed lines could detune the American tempo. Third, the weather. Thick overcast blunted Allied fighter bombers, the terror of every German driver since Normandy. The Luftwaffe could not dominate the sky, but it could fly low, conduct ground support in the first days, and attempt a one-day hammer blow against Allied airfields once the frontline crisis matured. In a tight window, German planners believed the air asymmetry would narrow enough to let armor sprint. Those assumptions about intelligence bias, road dependency, and weather were not insane. They were incomplete. They underestimated how fast the Allied system could redirect divisions, mass artillery, and improvise blocking positions on decisive ground. German design philosophy in late 1944 was still built around decisive concentration at the Schwerpunkt, armored divisions punching a breach for motorized infantry to exploit, with Nebelwerfer rockets and heavy artillery prepping the opening. The spearheads featured Panthers with high-velocity 75 guns, Panzer IVs for balance, assault guns and Jagdpanzers for ambush, and Tigers in scarce but psychological roles. Panzer Grenadiers rode in half-tracks when they had them, trucks when they did not, often on foot in the snow. Radios gave Kampfgruppe leaders flexibility, but frequencies were crowded, and staff work strained by destroyed cadres and accelerated training. Logistics dictated tactics. Petroleum was rationed. Many rear area halls used horses to conserve fuel. Bridging assets were capable. German engineers were seasoned, but traffic control on single-lane forest roads under blackout was a hard constraint. Timetables stacked corps and divisions nose to tail. One delay rippled backward for miles. Deception choices also shaped the force. Panzer Brigade 150, Operation Greif, siphoned vehicles, radios, and attention into a high-risk mission whose operational payoff proved limited next to the need for more tanks in the main effort. Training and human capital were pressured. Volk's Grenadier divisions, rebuilt with a mix of convalescents, transferees, and sailors or airmen reassigned to infantry, had strong automatic weapons tables but uneven fieldcraft. Crew experience in armored units varied. Some battalions retained hardened Eastern Front veterans, others absorbed replacements with abbreviated gunnery time. In the air, pilot training hours had collapsed compared to 1942. By 1944, Many new Luftwaffe fighter pilots logged 110-160 total hours, often 20 on type, less than half U.S. RAF norms in the same period. That mattered as soon as the weather broke. In short, the German design for Wacht am Rhein mixed proven hardware and daring with brittle sustainment and a thin margin for error. When it worked, at a crossroads at dawn, it looked like 1940. When it met a defended ridge under a sky that cleared at noon, it looked like 1944. First contact at the northern hinge set a pattern the operation would never quite shake. The Losheim Gap and the twin villages of Krinkelt-Roscherath funneled the 12th SS Hitlerjugend and neighboring formations toward Elsenborn Ridge, where the U.S. 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions, backed by quickly massed artillery, built a flexible wall. German infantry penetrated woods and edges of the villages, armor probed the streets, and several local breakthroughs occurred. But each lunge met point-blank bazookas in alleys, anti-tank guns covering choke points, and artillery called by forward observers who seemed to have a switchboard to the sky. What the German squads felt was a fire grid more than a front. American battalions shifted batteries, detached tank destroyers, and stacked defensive fires along pre-sighted lanes. On 22nd December alone, supporting U.S. units fired roughly 10,000 rounds into German attacks around Elsenborn, crushing infantry assaults even when a few tanks punched through. The net effect: German armor could enter the villages but could not cross the ridge line in strength. The shoulder held. The north door stayed locked. That meant congestion. Vehicles bunched up in the woods, side roads packed with half-tracks and guns, busted timetables multiplying delays down to corps level. In tactical terms, German company commanders adapted. They infiltrated through tree lines, turned American positions from the flank, and used assault guns to pound buildings before pushing grenadiers forward. They took streets and forfeited them by dusk, then fought over the same houses the next day. But they could not break the artillery network or the ridge. The 12th SS reportedly lost dozens of tanks in 3 days in the Twin Villages fight. Precise totals vary. And even where German infantry overran foxholes, counterfire and local reserves retook them by night. Every hour of delay in the north jammed roads and burned fuel for units in the center who needed clear lanes to Bastogne and the Meuse. The first contact foreshadowed the outcome. Spirit was there. The system beat it down. The turning point came not as one explosion, but as a series of holds that wrecked the calendar. St. Vith was the worst of them from the German view. There, engineers, armored cavalry, and pieces of the U.S. 7th Armored and 106th Infantry Divisions built a blocking position between 17 and 23 December that cost the 5th Panzer Army precious momentum. From the German perspective, this was supposed to be an early road hub. Instead, it became a stubborn knot. Kampfgruppen tried to bypass to the north and south, but attacks sheared off against ad hoc defenses, craters, and bridges blown on cue. Panzer battalions wasted hours probing for crossings while artillery harassed approaches. It was the kind of fight the plan had hoped to avoid, and it absorbed days. Parallel to that, the center thrust punched through Clairvaux. Panzer Lehr and II. Panzer rolled the U.S. 28th Infantry's forward elements in bitter street fighting and took the town after heavy losses on both sides. This victory mattered. Clairvaux was a gate toward Bastogne. German regiments pressed on, aiming to encircle the road hub before U.S. reserves could build a perimeter. But speed could not erase geography. 7 major roads converge at Bastogne, and by 20th December, the 101st Airborne, elements of the 10th Armored, and a medley of artillery and engineers had arrived to hold a 360-degree line. German forces surrounded the town and demanded surrender. The defenders refused. From the German command viewpoint, Bastogne split the central advance like a rock in a stream. Manteuffel wanted the town taken quickly, or masked and isolated while armor flowed west toward the Meuse. Both were tried. Assaults from multiple divisions struck the perimeter in snow and fog, with local penetrations. German batteries fired heavily. Tanks tried to punch south from Novel and east from Marvy. Kampfgruppen sought to cut the last trails. But by 23rd December, clear weather returned, and Allied aircraft began to resupply and strike. On 26th of December, 4th Armored's Spearhead opened a narrow corridor. Bastogne had not fallen. The calendar rebelled. The Meuse window narrowed to hours. That same week, German armor reached its high-water mark west of Dinant, elements of 2. Panzer reached Selles and Foy-Notre-Dame before fuel and counterattacks stopped them. British and American forces closed in. Columns stalled and were battered by artillery and air. Withdrawals turned into maulings as tanks were abandoned for lack of fuel and ammunition. The operational picture on 24-26 of December showed the truth. The shoulders held, the center was a bulge, not a breakthrough, and the Meuse was still beyond reach. The turning point was not one village, but a chain: St. Vith's delay, Bastogne's hold, Elsenborn's denial, and the Selles' halt. That bent the offensive backward. The campaign's engine room tells the fuller story. German supply to the Ardennes relied on strained railheads, horse teams for last-mile haul, and fuel rations that could not support prolonged maneuver. Staff plans explicitly counted on captured Allied fuel. Early success near Bullingen yielded 50,000 U.S. gallons. But such hauls were rare and often burned by marching and idling while columns waited at choke points. Even small delays meant large fuel waste under winter conditions. Artillery ammunition stocks were competent for an opening barrage, but harder to replace, especially as Allied counterattacks forced defensive fires. Maintenance was a math problem. Panthers with cold weather breakdowns need recovery vehicles and spare parts. Both were in short supply. Across the line, American logistics shifted gears faster than German planning assumed. Corps artillery groups massed guns across divisional fronts. Ammunition supply points pushed shells forward, despite security scares. Engineer units threw Bailey bridges and felled trees into abattises at record speed. By late December, Allied supply columns ran under better air cover and tighter traffic control, while German vehicles tried to hide by day. The U.S. could surge units, an armored division here, an airborne division there, into critical nodes because the theater logistic base and road discipline allowed it. This was not glamour. It was throughput. And throughput underwrites operations. Intelligence and command control shaped the opening and the endgame. Initially, German deception worked. Allied staff bias and German radio silence produced an intelligence shortfall. That gave the attackers the priceless first day. But once the blow fell, Allied command networks adapted. First Army and SHAEF rerouted reserves, tightened shoulder defense, and imposed priority use of road nets. Forward observers and artillery direction centers shortened the sensor-to-shooter loop, allowing massed fires wherever German armor showed. When the weather cleared on 23rd December, air-ground coordination returned. Fighter bombers hunted columns, while armored spearheads had to choose between daylight exposure and night movement on icy roads. German higher headquarters, by contrast, issued ambitious schedules to corps trying to unsnarl traffic jams among villages already choked with abandoned vehicles. The Luftwaffe's one grand attempt to flip the air equation, Operation Bodenplatte on Förster Cedro. Horsa's January 1945 achieved tactical damage on Allied airfields, but at catastrophic cost in trained pilots and aircraft, losses the Germans could not replace. The ground battle noticed the result. After the first week of January, Allied air harassment was again relentless, and German road movement even riskier. The Luftwaffe's last lunge proved the larger math, trading irreplaceable crews for repairable planes and runways on the other side. The human capital gap drove the curves under these maps. German infantry formations in late 1944 were patchwork. Volksgrenadiers had many automatic weapons, but uneven small unit cohesion and short training cycles. Artillery crews and forward observers were often competent, but coordination across reinforced Kampfgruppen strained with losses among veteran NCOs. Tank crews varied widely. Some were excellent, others green. In the air, the difference was brutal. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe sent pilots to combat with barely half the flight hours of their Allied opponents, with minimal time on type. Loss rates spiked precisely when training pipelines were starved of fuel by the oil campaign. So when weather shifted, German formations at the point of decision faced opponents with deeper practice in calling fire, integrating arms, and flying close support. By contrast, the American replacement and training system, imperfect and often cruel to unit cohesion, still delivered masses of trained gunners, drivers, and radio operators who could plug into standardized procedures. Field artillery had rehearsed mass fires. Engineer battalions knew bridge drills. MPs and staff understood traffic discipline and march tables. That repeatability, not just bravery, allowed battalion and corps commanders to improvise with confidence. Tactics and doctrine shifted as the offensive's pattern emerged. The Germans wanted a fast, deep fight through mist and woodland, where close-range gunnery favored experienced crews and Allied air could not bite. The Americans refused that fight at scale. They locked the shoulders, Elsenborn in the north, Luxembourg Heights in the south, then let the Germans pour into a controlled corridor. Instead of chasing columns, U.S. commanders sat on road nets and ridges, forced night moves, and used artillery to chew frontal assaults. Bastogne's perimeter denied the center line. British and U.S. forces placed blocking positions on the Meuse. When the weather turned, air power punished any attempt to mass. The Germans were forced into repeated set-piece attacks against prepared positions, the opposite of their preference. None of this erases German tactical skill or their early gains. Surprise on 16-18 December was genuine. Clairvaux fell after hard fighting. Columns reached deep near Celles. Kampfgruppe Piper sliced through early resistance and grabbed U.S. fuel near Böllingen. Operation Greif, though overvalued by rumor, created enough rear-area panic to spawn roadblocks and slow staff work for days. On several axes, German grenadiers showed toughness in cold, dark assaults, and artillery proved capable of damaging concentrations. Even after Bastogne's relief, counterattacks around the town forced costly U.S. pushes into January. These are not the marks of a hapless army. They are the marks of a brave force in a losing position. And there are caveats on figures. Casualty counts vary widely by source. German AFV write-off tallies diverge depending on cut-off dates, and whether disabled then recovered are included. Aircraft losses on 1st January are still debated among serious historians. Where ranges exist, this script chooses conservative bands and flags them for verification. Numbers matter, so does humility. Roll the numbers up with care. German committed strength in the Ardennes is often cited at 410,000, 450,000. Troops with 1,400, 1,500. Tanks, assault guns, and 2,600. Artillery pieces, 16 Dec 1944, mid-Jan 1945. The U.S. Allied total engaged grew beyond 600,000, 700,000 as reinforcements arrived. German casualties for 16T, T-Antin. DT-25. John run 63,000, 100,000, depending on the counting window. U.S. 75,000, 83,000, and British 1,400. German AFV write-offs across the campaign fall in 527, 700. Allied AFV losses vary by source and include many recoveries. Luftwaffe losses in the period are 500, 800 aircraft, with 271 to 300 destroyed on 1st January alone, versus Allied 250, 340 destroyed that day across sectors, again with disputes. Civilian dead in the battle area approximate 3,000. These are not just abstractions. They are the arithmetic of a failed offensive. Artillery statistics show the system at work. On 16th December, American Corps artillery managed only 2,500 planned defensive rounds given surprise. But by 22 December on the northern shoulder, single-day defensive fires reached 10,000 shells at Elsenborn. Ammunition delivery, fuse settings, fire direction, and communications all scaled up within days. Inversely, German units reported ammunition and fuel shortfalls precisely as the timetable slipped. Listen to the voice beneath the numbers. German diaries and after-action reports from corps and divisions describe courage alongside creeping fatalism. The themes repeat: traffic jams that swallow hours, bridges that should have been seized intact, American artillery that materializes on any daylight road, fuel trucks that never come, commanders forced to choose between sitting still or attacking into pre-sighted zones. Staff notes complain of over-ambitious schedules from higher headquarters, then accept them because what else is there? In early January, when the counterattacks bite, the reports harden. Orders to hold lines that cannot be held. The Luftwaffe's blow spent, and all eyes on extraction to the west wall. The tone is not panic, it is exhaustion. Operationally, the failed offensive bled Germany's last armored reserve in the west. Several Panzer divisions lost core vehicles and cadre they could not replace before spring. The Luftwaffe's pilot losses on sortie, January, mixed with ongoing attrition, removed the last hope of contesting Allied air in daylight. On the Allied side, the shock forced a pause and a reallocation of strength, but it ended with a more coherent front. The Bulge was compressed by mid-January. By late January, the line returned roughly to its start, with German units back behind the Siegfried Line. It was the last German offensive in the West for a reason. There was nothing left to spend. In the next 3 to 12 months, the ripples are clear. Immediately, Germany tried a secondary blow in Alsace, Operation Nordwind, which expended more scarce units without strategic effect. The Allies resumed the advance in February, crossed the Roer and the Rhine, and drove into the heartland under overwhelming air cover. In the east, Soviet offensives tore into the Vistula-Oder axis. The Ardennes gamble had been meant to split Allied politics and buy time. Instead, it accelerated a two-front strangulation. By April, German forces fought within their own borders with shrunken options. Ethics and civilians bear mention in any honest account. During the offensive, Waffen-SS troops of Kampfgruppe Piper murdered 84 U.S. prisoners near Malmedy on 17 December. Other killings occurred along the route. Belgian and Luxembourg civilians were trapped in contested villages in sub-zero temperatures, their homes shelled or burned. Several thousand died. The laws of war were strained by disguise operations and reprisals. None of this changes battlefield tactics. It shapes memory and responsibility. The campaign's human ledger includes POWs shot in snow and families displaced into forests with nothing but blankets. A factual telling must hold these truths without sensationalism. The legacy sits in doctrine classrooms. On offense, Wacht am Rhein warns against plans that demand flawless timing across multiple corps on constrained roads with thin logistics. Surprise can open doors. It cannot move depots. On defense, the Allied response validates shoulder holds, artillery massing, and road net denial, methods that turn a penetration into a cul-de-sac. In the air, Bodenplatte's lesson is stark. Do not trade irreplaceable crews for replaceable infrastructure. In training, the campaign underscores the cost of reduced flight hours, gunnery practice, and crew cohesion. Post-war armies mapped these lessons into standardized fire direction, traffic control doctrine, and combined arms integration. The spirit still matters. The system matters more. Return to the opening image. The junior panzer officer, the frost on the spruces, the map with pencil lines. In the days that followed, he would drive, halt, wait in a jam, advance, reverse, sleep in the turret, and stare at a fuel gauge that was always accusing him. He would see towns taken and then left behind, see bridges in the right place at the wrong time, and hear artillery arrive like verdicts. The offensive he had been promised, a knife-ripping canvas, became a maze built by other men. In that maze, courage could win corners. Only a system could win the day. The snow kept falling. The sky cleared. The road home bent east,